Hello and welcome to the Boot Room. Andy, Warren, Stuart Watson here to look ahead to Ipswich Town's clash with MK Dons in League One this weekend. Stu, Ipswich fans will be hoping they're not playing MK Dons next season. They'll be hoping that Town are playing Championship football. But as long as a game with MK Dons is on the fixture list, I think it's going to be one that fans are looking forward to because it's the annual takeover of the stadium, of the whole stadium, really, of Stadium MK. 7,000 fans following Ipswich to this one, and they'll be following them hoping to see their team win back-to-back for the first time in a very long time.
Yeah, it's been a special away game in the calendar since Ipswich have dropped into League One. I can recall Paul Lambert going over and giving a big fist pump for a big win there in the early days of League One. Kieran McKenna's talked about how last season it was a startling sight for him coming out and seeing more Ipswich fans than MK Dons fans unofficially. I think officially MK might have massaged the figures a little bit, but there's every chance there's going to be more Ipswich fans than MK Dons fans on their home patch, which is a rarity. Let's hope they can be that proverbial 12th man and help Ipswich get a win, because wins are required.
Yep, that's Town's currency at the moment. There's a gap formed to the automatic promotion places, but Ipswich aren't giving up on that. I don't think you're going to hear anybody from Ipswich saying they're settling for the playoffs. So wins are what's required, and they need to string them together, like we've said many times. But they're in the midst of a run where they should really be doing that. They've beaten Forest Green. They've got MK Dons to play, and there's still Burton and Accrington to come in this mini run of teams against what was the bottom six. They were in the bottom six. It's now the bottom seven. Those teams are in. The time is now, isn't it, Stu, to do this? There's no time to delay, really.
No, Ipswich haven't had back-to-back wins in the league since late October, and I spoke to Kieran McKenna about this in his press conference this morning. I think a heavy reference point going into this one will be what happened at Cambridge not so long ago. Ipswich thrashed Morecambe 4-0 at Portman Road in a very similar game to the one that we saw last weekend against Forest Green. Yes, they then had the Burnley FA Cup game in between, but in their next league game, they went to Cambridge and they didn't show up. There was no intensity to it. It was probably one of the worst performances of the season. Went 1-0 down. We're indebted to Christian Walton for making a penalty save and salvaged a 1-1 draw, which none of them were particularly proud of that day. So that's kind of highlighted Ipswich's inconsistencies of the last few months. One step forward gets followed by two steps back. That can't be the case again going into this one. All that said, Kieran McKenna is expecting this to be a tricky game against MK Dons. Thinks they're a better team than recent results and their league position suggests.
Yeah, this is a very different MK Dons to the one we've become used to, isn't it? This isn't the free flowing football team of Liam Manning's, which of course made the playoffs last season. So many of those players have departed, and I think we saw back in August when MK came to Suffolk just how difficult it is to regenerate a team after losing so many big players. Scott Twine, obviously, Harry Darling, Kasumu, all moved to the Championship. And they've had to build this again, haven't they? Obviously, Liam Manning lost his job December. Mark Jackson is in there now and overseen a bit of a style shift, and also some, in terms of personnel in January, a few coming in as well who have played at higher levels and maybe a bit more physical in certain ways. So it's going to be different, isn't it? This isn't the passing extravaganza that we talked about, I think, heading into the MK game last year, where we were expecting two teams to try and pass each other to death. It might not quite be like that this weekend.
No, Mark Jackson, obviously the former Leeds under-23s manager, that seems to be the trend in terms of League One managerial appointments at the moment, was the man to replace Manning just before Christmas. On the face of it, their results haven't improved that much, and they come into this game off the back of two pretty heavy beatings. They lost 5-0 at Bolton, and they lost 5-2 at Sheffield Wednesday last time out. But McKenna says that he's seen some signs that Jackson is starting to put his own stamp on it a little bit. 4 of the 5 goals against Bolton came from corners. Sheffield Wednesday, MK Dons were 2-1 up and had a big chance for 3-1. And the big thing that McKenna's zoning in on is their counter-attack threat. They sounds like they'll sit quite deep and narrow, look to hit you on the counter. And they've got a front three now of Mo Isa centrally, who's back from injury, and then two players that they brought in January in Jonathan Lecco and Suli Kai on the wings that are pacey, direct wingers that like to go 1v1. So a balancing act to be had for Ipswich to play their usual game, be on the front foot, try and boss the ball, attack, play their own game, but also just being a little bit wary of those counter threats that we saw a little bit of at Bristol Rovers recently, a similar style of play from Bristol Rovers. Ipswich managed to deal with that quite well that night. Hopefully they can do so again this weekend.
Yeah, another factor at play is the pitch here at MK Dons. Kieran McKenna doesn't seem overly worried about it. So he's talking about the pitch being something they're used to. They play on not particularly great surfaces every week, and I'd argue the Portman Road surface isn't particularly great either. But this MK Dons pitch has been given some attention in the last few days after an England women game there. Serena Wiegman, after that, labelled it unacceptable. I think it's coming up for a decade past its sell-by date in terms of how old that pitch is, and it's not great at all. And clearly that's not going to help a team who like to pass the ball and like to try and move it quickly, because that's the big thing that Wiegman highlighted. They could not move the ball quickly. So I do wonder whether Town will maybe mix things up a little bit here. Although saying that, we did see some more direct signs from Town against Forest Green last weekend, didn't we? So maybe it's not going to be that big a deal after all.
Yeah, it's a bit of a, as McKenna says, it's more of a stark contrast. If you're used to playing most of your games at Wembley Stadium on that pristine surface, that is going to be a bit more of a culture shock coming to MK Dons. Hopefully not that much of a shock to the system for Ipswich. And as you say, kind of just mixed it up a little bit more last weekend with all the talk after the Bristol Rovers game and the run of draws was that maybe Ipswich were getting a little bit too predictable with this sort of possession play and getting it wide, low balls into the box. I did feel like they mixed it up a little bit more against Forest Green, and maybe, you know, the pitch will be another reason to mix it up again this weekend.
And the reason they were so successful against Forest Green is the fast start. That wasn't there in the Cambridge game that you referenced earlier, and that kind of set the tone for a poor afternoon. So a fast start is always in order for Ipswich Town. With last weekend in mind, Stuart, Ipswich have just won 4-0. And logic there would suggest you're not going to be making drastic changes to your starting 11. I feel sure there will be at least one, though. There very rarely is. Just one. There's one unchanged side all season for Town. The bones of it will be there, but there's three areas, Stu, that I personally will be looking at. I think are the areas maybe to look at what Kieran McKenna does in this game. I'll start with the first one, which is the centre of midfield. We saw Massimo Luongo give a really good cameo in the ending to that Forest Green game, and on a pitch where it might be that bit more draining, bit physical, bit more of a physical presence in there in Luongo over Cameron Humphreys, who's been brilliant but has shown signs of fatigue, might just be preferable if Luongo's good to go.
Yeah, I agree with you. Taking absolutely nothing away from Cameron Humphreys, who has been, you know, we forget he's only just turned 19. He's played far more football than he or any of us expected this season because of circumstances. Still play, you know, to play the 4 games in a fortnight recently was a big ask of that young man. And yes, you know, there have been signs of fatigue. Yes, there have been times where his sort of physical development has been highlighted a little bit. But technically he's some player and he's going to go on to be some player. But now might be the time just for that little bit more experience of Massimo Luongo, who has produced 2 really exciting cameos so far. A brief one against Burnley in the home game, and again last weekend. Kieran McKenna was, talking him up this week in the press conference, saying how well he's trained this week and the role he's got playing forward. So I wouldn't be shocked to see a more experienced two of Morsey and Luongo for this.
Yeah, clearly a good player, but you're going to have to imagine he's not got 90 minutes in the tank either. So even if he does start, Humphreys is going to have a big role to play in this game. I'm sure he'll get on the pitch at some point. Area 2 of the team, the striker. We discuss it every week. Last week, George Hurst got the nod, but it was Ladapo that scored the goal and should have had a second late on. We've seen MK Dons before McKenna go with something a bit different up top with Jackson down the middle to try and stretch them a bit. This is a different Dons team now, but I just wonder whether, with conditions being as it is and like intricate passing maybe not being the order of the day from the start, that Hurst might be the answer here. Some bit more leggy, bit more able to get in behind potentially. Which way would you go with the striker? I think I'd lean towards Hurst, although my natural instinct is to tell you Ladapo pretty much every week. I think on this occasion I'd lean Hurst's way.
Yeah, I think that's the way I'm leaning as well for his running in behind. He's more of an instinct to run off the last shoulder, wherever Ladapo is to drop in and link play a little bit more. From everything we've discussed about the counter threat and the pitch and the conditions of this game, and Hurst is probably a bit better in the air in terms of winning aerial duels and things like that. And let's also not hide away from the fact that they wanted Hurst for a long time, Ipswich, for a reason. And I think in much the way that McKenna spoke today about it was always our intention for Nathan Broadhead to be a regular starter, I'm pretty sure that they'll be feeling the same about George Hurst. And that's, again, taking that in the same way that we've just talked about Humphreys and taking nothing away from him, take nothing away from Freddie Ladapo. I feel very sorry for him, actually, because he just started to really click and find some form in January. But McKenna signed Hurst for a reason. And I think he might try and sort of get him really match sharp now and roll out a few games for him.
Yep, and as always, both strikers will have a role to play. The last area of the pitch, Stu, we seem to be leaning the same way on a few of these. The last area of the pitch I'm going to talk about is the wide right position. We've been talking about this one for a few weeks as well. The legs of Caden Jackson. Could this be a game where we get to see that from the start down the right? He's looked good off the bench. He's threatened. His crossing has caused problems. Could he take Wes Burns' place for this game? Which way are you leaning?
I think he could. I'm not sure if he will. If I'm honest, I think I talk sometimes about players being in the green, red or amber zone in terms of team selection. I think Wes Burns has been in the amber zone for quite some time now, and I think I think his reputation from his first season has probably stopped him from dropping out of the team a little bit. And I think now might be Caden Jackson's time a little bit, for whatever reason, whether it's confidence, whether it's just a bit of fatigue setting in for Wes Burns, whether he's carrying a little bit of a knock that we don't know about, I don't know. But he just hasn't been that same sort of dynamic, confident player that we knew and loved from a little while ago now. And Caden Jackson, every time he's come on the pitch recently, has looked a real handful, whether it be the Burnley games, whether it was when he came on last weekend. And if we're talking about the two wide men of MK Dons being pacey, direct threat on the counter, maybe Caden Jackson gives them something a little bit different to think about going the other way with his pace.
Yeah, I think a combo of him and Hurst trying to do that, being capable of getting in behind, helps me. Excites me. Sorry, you've got technical players in there. You've got Chaplin who can buzz around and cause problems. Broadhead's a very technical football player. I quite like the idea of a bit of running, a bit of chaos up there, and just see where that gets you. Have you got any other areas of the pitch you want to highlight? It was everything else to me kind of feels pretty set.
One more I would throw into the mix: right back.
Okay,
It's whether
I
you
thought
think
you might.
it's whether you think Janoy Danassian is a bit more of a pragmatic option for this sort of game, coming up against a pacey wide threat, rather than the sort of shackles off Harry Clark option. And he's still learning that kind of bespoke right back role that Ipswich play, as all the new boys are still kind of getting up to speed with McKenna ball at the moment. Given how McKenna's talked about MK Don's threats, I just wonder if it might be more of a JD game than a Harry Clark one.
I think my gut tells me they'll persist with Clark, but I think if you think about it, we talk about Danassian being a really good one-on-one defender, and if the threat is coming through kind of, you've got Kai and Leko, who are both quite technical players. If they can get on the ball, they want to be on the ball and attacking the box. I think some one-on-one defending, some really reliable one-on-one defending could be useful there. That's an interesting one. As always, Stu, we'll find out at 2 p.m. Let's just pause to look at some key stats before we return to discuss any other issues and make some predictions. Okay, there's some key stats. Let's jump to some predictions, Stu. Cut to the chase. Are Town going to secure back-to-back wins? We've been waiting a long time for this. Is this going to be the day?
I'm going to say yes, Andy. Not with utter conviction, because I think the last few months doesn't enable you to do that with Ipswich at the moment. But I think lessons will have been learnt from that Cambridge game that we spoke about earlier. I think they'll come into this with full focus, and hunger and fight and a desire to show that they can get back to being a winning machine again. I think that away support, the impact of that is not to be underestimated. All those things combined makes me think that if they can get ahead in this game, MK Don's confidence will be that little bit fragile at the moment, and they'll go on and get the job done.
Put a number on it then, please. Or two numbers.
Okay. 2-0, and I really want to see a clean sheet again, because I think that will enable Ipswich to get back to their best under McKenna when they were rattling out the clean sheets. That would be 3 in a row, and that would be very nice indeed.
We really are leaning the same way today. I talked myself down from 3 to 2-0, and I've just written our preview for that game, and I went with 2-0. So I'll stick with that here. Hopefully we're both correct, and you can find out if you're not going to the game by following it with us tomorrow, and we'll see you there.